She's just the cook. Those words followed Petty Officer Second Class Ellie Harris everywhere she went on Forward Operating Base Vanguard in an undisclosed hostile region. At 27 years old, with sandy blonde hair usually tied back in a practical ponytail, bright hazel eyes that noticed everything, and hands that could prepare meals for 200 soldiers as easily as they could field strip an M4 carbine, Ellie didn't fit anyone's expectations of what combat capability looked like. She'd enlisted as a culinary specialist, spent 4 years learning to feed troops in the most austere environments imaginable, and had deployed twice to combat zones where her job was to maintain morale through quality food service. But what her fellow sailors didn't know, what even her command didn't fully understand, was that Ellie Harris had grown up in rural Montana with a father who'd been a Marine Corps sniper instructor, learning to shoot before she could drive, hunting elk in terrain that made military training look easy. When a coordinated enemy assault captured 12 Navy SEALs during a patrol gone wrong, leaving them bound and awaiting execution in an enemy compound 5 kilometers from base, Ellie would discover that sometimes the most dangerous person on any base isn't the one with the most impressive job title. It's the one everyone underestimated, carrying an M4 carbine and enough determination to walk into hell alone to bring her teammates home. Petty Officer Second Class Ellie Harris had been serving as the lead culinary specialist at Forward Operating Base Vanguard for 4 months, responsible for managing food service operations that kept more than 300 military personnel fed, motivated, and ready for operations in one of the most hostile regions on Earth. Her days started at 0400 hours, preparing breakfast for soldiers and sailors who would spend their day conducting dangerous missions. She managed inventory, supervised junior culinary specialists, coordinated with supply chains that operated across thousands of miles, and somehow maintained food quality standards that would have challenged restaurants in peaceful cities. But despite the critical nature of her work, hungry troops are ineffective troops, as every military leader knew, Ellie was viewed by most personnel at FOB Vanguard as just the cook. The combat arms personnel who conducted missions outside the wire saw food service as support rather than combat capability. The special operations forces who operated from the base rarely interacted with culinary staff beyond eating the meals they prepared. Even her own command chain, while appreciating her professional competence, didn't see her as anything beyond her job description. What they didn't know was that Ellie Harris had more trigger time than half the combat personnel on the base. She'd grown up in rural Montana, daughter of retired Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant William Bull Harris, who'd spent 20 years as a scout sniper instructor at Marine Corps Base Quantico. From the time Ellie was 8 years old, her father had taught her marksmanship, fieldcraft, land navigation, and tactical movement through terrain that made Afghanistan look easy. By the time she was 16, Ellie could hit targets at 800 meters with her father's hunting rifle, track elk through mountain wilderness for days at a time, and move through forests so quietly that deer didn't detect her presence until she was within arm's reach. When she'd enlisted in the Navy at 18, Ellie had scored expert marksman on every weapons qualification, completed advanced combat training that most culinary specialists never attempted, and volunteered for every tactical exercise that would accept support personnel. But none of that mattered to the personnel at FOB Vanguard, who saw her job title and made assumptions about her capabilities. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Johnson, the senior enlisted SEAL at the base, exemplified the attitude most special operations personnel had toward support staff. "Harris," he said one afternoon as she served lunch in the dining facility, "this chicken is outstanding. You've got real talent in the kitchen." "Thank you, Chief," Ellie replied professionally, even though she knew the compliment was condescending. He would never compliment a fellow SEAL's real talent at basic job requirements. "Ever think about what you'll do after the Navy? You could probably run a restaurant somewhere." Ellie smiled politely. "I haven't decided yet, Chief. Still focused on the mission here." Johnson nodded absently, already moving on to more important conversations with the combat personnel who shared his table. To him, Ellie was competent at her job, but fundamentally unimportant to the actual combat operations that defined the base's purpose. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, the officer in charge of base support operations, was one of the few people who recognized that Ellie's capabilities extended beyond food service. "Harris, I reviewed your personnel file," Mitchell said during a routine evaluation meeting. "Your weapons qualifications are exceptional. You've completed tactical training that most support personnel never attempt. Why did you choose culinary specialist as your rating?" Ellie had been asked this question before and had a standard answer ready. "Ma'am, I wanted to serve, and I'm good at cooking. Troops need to eat, and I can help ensure they're well-fed and mission-ready." But you could have qualified for other ratings, potentially even special operations support roles. Your background and skills suggest capabilities beyond food service. "Ma'am, every rating is important. I'm serving where the Navy needs me." Mitchell studied her thoughtfully. "Harris, I'm not questioning your dedication or your performance. You're exceptional at your job. I'm just noting that you have capabilities that extend beyond your current duties." "Thank you, ma'am. If the Navy needs me to do something different, I'm ready. Until then, I'll keep doing my job professionally." What Ellie didn't say, what she couldn't say without sounding arrogant or difficult, was that she'd chosen culinary specialist specifically because it allowed her to deploy to combat zones while avoiding the gender-based scrutiny that female personnel in combat roles often faced. She'd watched female Marines and soldiers fight twice as hard for half as much recognition, endure constant questioning of their capabilities, and deal with assumptions that they were less capable than their male counterparts. By choosing a support rating, Ellie avoided those battles while still deploying to the environments where she could serve. But it also meant that when the moment came, when her capabilities were desperately needed, nobody would believe she possessed them. That moment came on a Tuesday morning in October, during what should have been a routine patrol by a Navy SEAL team operating from FOB Vanguard. Ellie was preparing lunch when the emergency alert echoed through the base. All personnel, this is base command. SEAL Team 7 has been ambushed and captured during patrol operations. 12 personnel are confirmed captured and being held at enemy compound approximately 5 kilometers northwest of base. QRF is mobilizing for rescue operation. The dining facility went silent as everyone processed what they'd heard. Enemy forces didn't usually capture American Special Operations personnel. They typically killed them immediately, or the SEALs fought to the death rather than allow capture. The fact that 12 SEALs had been taken alive meant the tactical situation had been catastrophic and the enemy had specific plans for their prisoners. Ellie continued working, but her mind was racing through tactical calculations. 5 kilometers northwest, that was terrain she'd studied during her morning runs around the base perimeter. The enemy compound mentioned in the alert was a fortified position that intelligence had been monitoring for weeks. If the SEALs were being held there, rescue would require either a major assault with significant forces or a small team insertion that could extract prisoners before the enemy could execute them. She listened to radio chatter as she worked, hearing the quick reaction force being briefed on the situation. The news was worse than the initial alert had suggested. The 12 captured SEALs were being held in a fortified compound, defended by approximately 50 enemy fighters. Intelligence indicated the prisoners would be executed within hours. The enemy planned to film the executions for propaganda purposes, making an example of American Special Operations Forces. The QRF was preparing for an assault, but coordination would take at least 3 hours. Aviation assets were being scrambled, supporting units were being briefed, and tactical plans were being developed for an operation that would risk significant casualties to rescue 12 prisoners. 3 hours might be too long. Ellie made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She walked out of the dining facility, went to her quarters, and began preparing for a solo rescue operation that every military doctrine said was impossible. She changed into combat utilities, strapped on body armor, grabbed her M4 carbine and ammunition, filled her assault pack with supplies she'd need for movement through hostile territory, and prepared to do something that would either save 12 lives or end her own. Lieutenant Mitchell encountered Ellie as she was leaving her quarters, fully equipped for combat. "Harris, what are you doing? You're not assigned to the QRF." "Ma'am, those SEALs don't have 3 hours. The QRF will be too late. I'm going to get them out now." Mitchell stared at her in disbelief. Harris, you're a culinary specialist, not a special operations soldier. You can't conduct a solo rescue operation against a fortified enemy compound. Ma'am, with respect, I can and I will. Those are our people being held by an enemy that's going to kill them. Someone needs to act now, and I'm the only person who can move immediately. Harris, this is insane. You'll be killed. Even if you could reach the compound, you can't extract 12 prisoners by yourself. Ellie met Mitchell's eyes with absolute certainty. Ma'am, I grew up in Montana hunting elk in terrain worse than this. My father was a Marine Corps sniper instructor who taught me fieldcraft before I could drive. I can move through hostile territory undetected. I can shoot better than half the combat personnel on this base, and I know that if I don't try, 12 Americans are going to die within the next few hours. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. Mitchell recognized the determination in Ellie's eyes and made a command decision that would either vindicate or destroy her career. Harris, officially, I'm ordering you to stand down and return to your duties. Unofficially, if you're going to do this anyway, take this radio and keep me informed of your position. I'll delay reporting your absence as long as possible. Ellie took the radio. Thank you, ma'am. Harris, bring those SEALs home, and bring yourself home too. 30 minutes later, Ellie was moving through hostile territory using fieldcraft techniques her father had drilled into her since childhood. She moved low and slow, using terrain features for concealment, stopping frequently to observe her surroundings, and employing the kind of tactical patience that separated professionals from amateurs. Her Montana upbringing had taught her that rushed movement got you killed, whether you were hunting elk or evading enemy forces. The 5-kilometer movement to the enemy compound took her 2 hours, but she arrived undetected and in position to conduct reconnaissance of the target. The compound was exactly as intelligence had described, a fortified position with approximately 50 enemy fighters, multiple buildings, and defensive positions that would make a frontal assault extremely costly. Through her rifle scope, Ellie could see the 12 captured SEALs bound and guarded in a central courtyard. They were being held under guard by approximately 20 enemy fighters, while the rest of the force manned defensive positions around the compound perimeter. The tactical situation was worse than she'd hoped, but not impossible. The enemy wasn't expecting rescue. They'd positioned guards to prevent escape rather than to repel assault, and their defensive focus was on the approaches that a conventional rescue force would use. Ellie wasn't going to use conventional approaches. She keyed her radio to contact Lieutenant Mitchell. This is Harris. I'm in position overlooking the target compound. I can confirm 12 American prisoners alive and being held in the central courtyard. Approximately 50 enemy fighters total, with 20 guarding prisoners and 30 manning perimeter defenses. Executing rescue plan now. Mitchell's voice came back tense with worry. Harris, the QRF is still 2 hours out. Can you wait for support? Negative. Enemy fighters are preparing execution site. Prisoners don't have 2 hours. I'm going in alone. Harris, this is suicide. Ma'am, this is what I'm trained for, even if nobody believes it. Harris out. What happened over the next 90 minutes would become one of the most remarkable solo combat actions in modern military history, and one that nobody would believe had been conducted by a Navy culinary specialist. Ellie began her assault by systematically eliminating the enemy fighters manning perimeter defensive positions. Using the marksmanship skills her father had taught her and the terrain knowledge she'd gained during her approach, she engaged targets from positions that the enemy couldn't pinpoint. Her first shot eliminated a guard in a tower position 300 meters away. The suppressed report from her M4 was quiet enough that nearby guards didn't immediately identify the source. Her second shot eliminated a guard near the compound's vehicle entrance. The man simply dropped, and nearby fighters assumed he'd fainted from the heat. Ellie moved position after each shot, using the same techniques she'd employed hunting elk, never staying in one place long enough for prey to identify your location, always thinking 3 moves ahead, constantly using terrain to your advantage. Over 30 minutes, she eliminated 8 enemy fighters manning perimeter positions, creating gaps in the defensive network that would allow her to approach the compound's central courtyard where the SEALs were being held. But eliminating guards quietly was the easy part. The hard part would be reaching 12 bound prisoners, surrounded by 20 guards, and extracting them before the remaining enemy forces could respond. Ellie moved to a position that overlooked the courtyard where the SEALs were being held. Through her scope, she could see that the prisoners had been bound with rope rather than restraints. The enemy hadn't expected them to remain prisoners long enough to require sophisticated security. That gave her an opportunity. She waited until the guard rotation changed, a moment when guards were moving between positions and attention was divided. Then, engaged the guards surrounding the prisoners with rapid precision fire. Her M4 cracked repeatedly as she placed accurate shots on guards who were standing around bound prisoners. Each shot was carefully aimed to avoid hitting Americans while eliminating threats. In 15 seconds, she eliminated 6 guards and created enough confusion that the remaining guards began seeking cover rather than maintaining control of prisoners. Ellie transmitted on the captured radio she'd taken from a guard. SEAL Team 7, this is friendly forces conducting rescue. Cut your bonds and move to the south wall. I'm providing covering fire. Chief Johnson, who'd complimented her cooking skills just days earlier, didn't recognize her voice, but he recognized opportunity. He worked his bound hands free, cut the bonds of his fellow SEALs, and led them toward the south wall, while Ellie provided covering fire against enemy forces attempting to stop their escape. The enemy compound erupted in chaos as approximately 40 remaining fighters tried to prevent 12 escaping prisoners from reaching freedom. They had superior numbers, they were in defensive positions, and they had the advantage of fighting on familiar terrain. But Ellie Harris had something they didn't: the ability to shoot accurately under pressure, the tactical patience to wait for clear shots, and the motivation that came from knowing that 12 Americans would die if she failed. She engaged enemy fighters who attempted to block the SEALs' escape route, eliminating threats with precision marksmanship while the prisoners fought their way toward the compound's south wall. Chief Johnson and his team reached the wall, climbed over using tactical techniques that years of training had made automatic, and found themselves face to face with the person who'd been providing covering fire. Johnson stared at Ellie Harris, the culinary specialist he'd patronized just days earlier, wearing full combat gear, carrying an M4 that showed evidence of sustained firing, and calmly scanning for additional threats. "Harris? What the hell are you doing here?" "Rescuing you, Chief. We need to move. Enemy forces are regrouping for pursuit." "You're a cook. How did you—" "Chief, with respect, we can discuss my job title later. Right now, we need to move to the rally point and wait for QRF pickup. Follow me." Ellie led the 12 rescued SEALs through terrain she'd memorized during her approach, using movement techniques that her father had taught her and tactical awareness that surprised the special operations personnel who'd spent years training for exactly these situations. Chief Johnson moved beside her as they traveled. "Harris, where did you learn to move like this? Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father was a Marine Corps sniper instructor, Chief. I grew up hunting in Montana. I know how to move through hostile territory." "Why the hell are you a culinary specialist if you can shoot and move like this?" "Because troops need to eat, Chief, and I'm good at cooking." "Doesn't mean I can't do other things when necessary." They reached the rally point Ellie had identified during her planning, established security, and waited for the QRF to arrive for extraction. When the Quick Reaction Force helicopters arrived 30 minutes later, they found 13 Navy personnel secured in defensive positions, 12 rescued SEALs, and 1 culinary specialist who'd conducted a solo combat rescue that military doctrine said was impossible. The QRF commander, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, approached Ellie with an expression that mixed disbelief and respect. "Harris, I just received a sitrep from Chief Johnson. He says you conducted a solo infiltration of an enemy compound, eliminated multiple guards, freed 12 prisoners, and led them through hostile territory to this rally point. Is that accurate?" "Yes, ma'am. The SEALs didn't have time to wait for coordinated rescue. I moved immediately and executed the extraction." Hayes studied her for a long moment. "Harris, you're a culinary specialist second class. You're not assigned to special operations. You had no authorization to conduct combat operations. What you did was completely outside your job description and chain of command." "Yes, ma'am. I understand. I'll accept whatever consequences come from my actions. but 12 Americans are alive who would have been executed if I'd waited for proper authorization." Hayes looked at Chief Johnson, who nodded confirmation. "Ma'am, Harris saved our lives. We were hours away from execution. The QRF couldn't have reached us in time. She moved alone through hostile territory, eliminated enemy guards, freed us from captivity, and led us to safety. What she did was extraordinary. Hayes made a decision that would affect the rest of Ellie's career. Harris, you're under investigation for unauthorized combat operations and leaving your assigned duty station without permission. However, you're also being recommended for the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. Whatever happens administratively, what you did today saved 12 lives and prevented a propaganda victory for enemy forces." The aftermath of Ellie's rescue operation rippled through not just FOB Vanguard but the entire Special Operations community. The 12 SEALs she'd rescued became her strongest advocates, making clear that she'd conducted the operation with tactical proficiency that matched or exceeded what they'd expect from fellow Special Operations personnel. Chief Johnson, who'd patronized her cooking skills just days earlier, spoke for the entire rescued team. Harris moved through hostile territory like a ghost, shot like a sniper, and executed a solo rescue operation that we teach is tactically impossible. She's not just a cook. She's one of the most capable combat personnel I've ever worked with, regardless of job title. But the administrative response was complicated. Ellie had violated multiple regulations by leaving her assigned duties without authorization, conducting combat operations outside her job description, and taking actions that could have resulted in her death and significant embarrassment for the Navy if she'd failed. The investigation into her actions lasted 3 weeks and included testimony from dozens of personnel who'd interacted with her during her deployment. Lieutenant Mitchell testified about Ellie's background and capabilities. Harris has exceptional skills that extend beyond her rating. She chose culinary specialist as her job, but her capabilities include advanced marksmanship, tactical movement, and combat decision-making. When she assessed that the captured SEALs would be executed before the QRF could conduct a coordinated rescue, she made a tactical decision to act immediately using capabilities that nobody knew she possessed. The investigating officer, Captain Richard Morrison, asked the question that defined the entire investigation. Why didn't anyone know about Harris's combat capabilities? Why was someone with advanced tactical skills serving as a culinary specialist? Mitchell's answer was direct. Because we judge people by their job titles rather than their actual capabilities, sir. Harris chose to serve as a culinary specialist, performed that job exceptionally well, and nobody bothered to look beyond her rating to understand what else she could contribute. She had to conduct an unauthorized solo rescue operation before anyone recognized that she possessed capabilities far beyond food service. The investigation concluded with findings that created significant changes in how the Navy managed personnel assignments and evaluated capabilities. Ellie was officially reprimanded for unauthorized absence from duty and conducting combat operations without proper authorization. The reprimand would remain in her permanent record. She was also awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat, becoming one of the few culinary specialists ever to receive the nation's second highest combat valor decoration. More significantly, she was offered the opportunity to attend screening for naval special warfare training, an invitation extended to very few personnel and almost never to those outside combat ratings. Ellie accepted the invitation and became one of the first female personnel to complete the full special warfare training pipeline, eventually serving as a special operations combat medic where her culinary skills, Montana fieldcraft, and proven combat capabilities combined to make her exceptionally effective. But perhaps the most important outcome of her actions was cultural rather than administrative. The Navy began reviewing how it identified and utilized personnel capabilities that extended beyond job descriptions. Training programs were modified to allow support personnel to demonstrate tactical skills. Evaluation systems were changed to assess capabilities rather than just performance within narrow job descriptions. Young sailors entering the Navy after Ellie's story became known grew up in a service that had learned that capability and job title weren't always aligned, and that the most valuable personnel were often those who could contribute in unexpected ways when circumstances demanded it. Years later, when Lieutenant Commander Ellie Harris spoke at the Naval Academy about leadership and capability, she reflected on her experience as a culinary specialist who'd conducted a combat rescue. When I was serving meals at FOB Vanguard, people saw my job title and made assumptions about what I could contribute. They saw culinary specialist and thought that defined my entire value to the mission. What they didn't see was my Montana upbringing, my father's training, my marksmanship capabilities, or my tactical skills. She paused, then continued. When 12 SEALs were captured and facing execution, nobody thought to ask the cook if she could help. They assumed that because I prepared meals, I couldn't conduct combat operations. That assumption almost cost 12 lives. The lesson isn't that everyone should be able to do everything. It's that we should never assume we know someone's full capabilities based on their job title alone. Ellie's story became more than military history. It became a reminder that excellence exists in unexpected places, that capability often hides behind assumptions, and that the most valuable team members are sometimes the ones everyone underestimated. The SEALs who'd patronized her cooking skills learned that the person serving their meals possessed combat capabilities they'd never imagined. The command structure that had seen her as support personnel learned that job titles don't define human potential. The entire military learned that effectiveness comes from recognizing and utilizing capabilities wherever they exist, not from assuming that job descriptions define human worth. Because sometimes the most dangerous person on any base isn't the one with the most impressive job title or the highest rank or the most decorated uniform. Sometimes it's the person everyone called just the cook, who walks into hell alone with an M4 carbine and enough determination to bring 12 teammates home alive. Ellie Harris had been making meals for soldiers until enemies seized her SEAL team and she went to war. And in going to war, she proved that capability knows no job description, excellence accepts no limitations based on ratings, and when lives hang in the balance, what matters isn't your title. It's what you can do when everything depends on it. The cultural transformation that began with Ellie's rescue operation extended far beyond Forward Operating Base Vanguard. Within 18 months, the Navy had fundamentally revised how it identified and utilized personnel capabilities that transcended job descriptions. Support ratings personnel were given opportunities to demonstrate tactical skills previously reserved for combat specialties. Culinary specialists, logistics personnel, and administrative staff began receiving advanced weapons training and tactical education that recognized their potential to contribute beyond traditional roles. Chief Johnson, who had patronized Ellie's cooking skills just days before she saved his life, became the most vocal advocate for recognizing hidden capabilities. "We almost died because we assumed the cook couldn't fight," Johnson told officer candidates at Naval Special Warfare Training. Ellie Harris proved that job titles don't define human capability. They just describe one aspect of what someone can contribute. The 12 SEALs she rescued collectively submitted testimony that led to policy changes affecting tens of thousands of support personnel across all military branches. Training programs were modified to assess capabilities rather than just job performance. Evaluation systems began measuring potential rather than simply rating current duties. Young sailors entering the Navy after Ellie's story became legendary grew up in a service that had learned a critical lesson. Never assume you know someone's full capabilities based on their rating badge alone. At her retirement ceremony after 20 years of distinguished service, Captain Ellie Harris, who had risen through the ranks and eventually commanded a Naval Special Warfare Support Unit, reflected on her journey from culinary specialist to combat legend. "I didn't stop being a cook when I picked up that rifle. I just showed that being a cook didn't define everything I could do. The lesson isn't that everyone should be a warrior. It's that we should never limit people based on our assumptions about what their job title means they can or cannot contribute." Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you can subscribe to see more incredible stories like this one.